did you go about selecting this jury after we came?
Yeah. So I really thank you for asking. And I really enjoyed the opportunity of sharing to different voices. I want different voices. I think one of the things we do as we mature in the business and we become sort of senior people in the business is that we allow insights for emerging generations to be able to understand some of the real issues because they don't change. Their fundamentals as delivery of work, there's different topologies. That is the business of our work. But young emerging firms, are always spending such a long time inventing new topologies and trying to think about changing the world that actually it's really great for them to just see the business of how architecture actually is affecting people's lives and doing things. So, I've been a long time supporter of Sumaya Valley. I was part of the jury that chose her for the Serpentine Pavilion, which sort of launched her career. So she's somebody I sort of mentor, and she's a very academic, intellectual architect, but really coming into commissions. So I wanted her to really understand and bring her thinking, about a sort of way in which the world and equity and value, she believes in that as a kind of model of architecture. And so to have her mind and her critical thinking bear on everyday work was, I think, really important. And I think Sean Canty is one of the kind of really beautiful poetic voices emerging in the American landscape from his generation. Incredibly sensitive and poetic designer from the African American community and a real talent, and somebody I've also supported and I think is very, very special. And he's more of a teacher and doing installation. He's at that beginning stage of installation, small scale projects. So again, to see what happens was very important to be able to give him that opportunity. And then obviously Joe Franchina is one of the senior directors in my studio, my New York studio. And he's a very experienced set of hands. He's really been with me for nearly 30 years. So I wanted, as somebody who is kind of a right-hand man, person for me to also really bring our experience and what we've been doing to bear on the sort of portfolio that we were seeing. So that's how I chose it. That's like a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of this. Yeah.
Joe obviously brings some really in the weeds, how to get projects done.
He's the American context. He knows about American projects. So he was able to talk to these young architects about what it takes to deliver these things, how these, what are some of the issues that don't seem obvious, that are challenging in terms of code, or all these are issues that may have been solved. And I think he was very, very instrumental for them in terms of understanding beyond the pictures what it takes to make these kinds of buildings.
And just real quickly, do you mind describing the process you went through and how you kind of came to your decisions?
Yeah, no, we went through a process of going collectively through. First, we all had a sort of dry run of the projects and ranked the ones that we liked, but we kept that to ourselves. And then we came together and we broke the projects into the topologies, the different types. And then we ran through how we had scored privately each of those typologies. And then we actually discussed all the projects all over again and wanted to see if there was still consensus. After hearing everybody's comments, everybody, all of us commented on why we thought something was. And it allowed for a very lively discussion to unveil, maybe things that weren't obvious, or to also hear different sort of insights that hadn't become consensual. So, I wanted that to resonate, and we had very fruitful discussions, which were very enjoyable for everyone. So grateful. It's an incredible amount of hard work to put together, that it's also money, it's expensive. So, we wanted to be very respectful of everyone's time and the efforts they put in. So we discussed every single project, and then we ranked it again, and we did it very much with a kind of show of hands about, support, not support, or category, and we just ranked through until we got to the winners. And that was very exciting. And then, reflecting back on, the special mentions and all the other things that were sort of put in, we ranked those after we'd got the core sort of winners.
Perfect. I think my final question would be, what are your suggestions for next year's flock of candidates?
I think it's I just think that it was very nice to see sometimes some very modest projects, but that were very inventive. I think adaptive reuse and invention and adaptive reuse is definitely a very important category to take very seriously. It's a side of architecture that I think is becoming more and more important. So seeing more adaptive reuse will be really exciting, and for people to not feel that it's just about object buildings or new buildings, but to feel like this idea of the circular life of architecture is a big topic. So encourage that to come in. Small projects are encouraged. I'd like to see more small projects, modest projects. Because I don't think it's always, a big project doesn't necessarily mean more skill or more capability. So it's also nice to be able to do that. But then with the bigger projects, it's wonderful to see the uptake of, really important values coming through. So again, values projects are really to be encouraged. If it doesn't matter if you didn't have the high budget, but if you had values that guided the project and gave more to the project beyond just the financial muscle, I think that you should put in it and tell us about that, because architecture has become much wider now.